Hey, how are you? I wanted to talk to you today about Don Draper from Mad Men, and particularly what happens in season 1, episode 13, about the carousel. And it's a great show and I love it, and Don Draper is like a wonderfully written, complicated character. So let's get into what happens in this carousel episode. So we have Don Draper pitching a slide projector ad campaign to the Kodak executives. They had insisted that their new projector be called The Wheel. Kind of joke about how it's boring. They want him to make this come alive then. So Don has come up with a different idea though, and it's quite compelling. So in the show we see him dim the lights, and then he starts the carousel with photographs of his life, his picture-perfect life. You see his wife Betty, his children, their life together, clicking through on the screen. And then it also just shows Don and his facial expressions too while he's doing this. He talks about nostalgia, not as sentimentality, as something older and more precise. He calls it a twinge in the heart. More powerful than just memory alone. The photos, they're a way of traveling around and around and back home again. His colleagues are all moved, one runs away in tears. And the Kodak men are stunned as well. He is sharing all of this with a room full of men who also get this nostalgia and this twinge. It clicks. But what they don't know about Don is that wherever he is and whoever he is with, even in a room full of people, Don feels utterly and completely alone. So here's what I want you to know about those photographs. They weren't just family photos. They were pictures from a life Don was pretending to have. And Don Draper isn't even his real name. He's Dick Whitman. He's a man who took a dead soldier's identity to escape a past that was too painful for him to carry and keep living. So for the presentation, he used all these images of happiness, of a loving husband and father, of a man who belongs somewhere and is loved. It's for the show. But prior to his pitch, we see him alone at his desk. And this is at home while he's thinking this up. He pulled out a photo from his early life. He looked at the picture of Adam on the horse. And this was just Don alone, in the quiet, all while thinking about the life he was performing in the present. And then he sold the nostalgia he has for his wife and kids in Connecticut, like beautifully, breathtakingly, heartbreakingly, to a room full of strangers and acquaintances at work. So, if I could just sit down with Don right now, and I've sat with a lot of men like him throughout my career and even in my personal life, here's what I'd want him to know. You felt everything, I know that. And you aren't numb. I mean, we look at Don, he numbed himself with booze and cigarettes and chasing women. But we know he really felt that ache for something he couldn't quite capture. The ache in that room was completely real. And he never just found the door into the place where his family actually was, where he could just be present and open and his real self. And in my office, I was lucky enough to meet with these men with very busy lives and provide a space where they could just be themselves and listen to. So Don's distance, it's not moral failure. If we look at it, I see all these patterns and how people feel misunderstood and have their guard up. The patterns can be understood and eventually changed. It does take a little work, but if you do it, just imagine you can find that door. So I've known men like Don. Like I said, I've sat across from them in my clinical office for over 27 years. And I've known them as friends, as family, as partners, all these people I cared about deeply. And the thing that struck me every time, the thing that stayed with me, was the hunger was always there. This longing for real connection, for feeling home, for someone to just know them without requiring any performance. And that longing, like, was never absent. They just had trouble finding their way to that real connection, to the door, to really feeling connected. So we fast forward decades, because Dawn had a slide projector, and I remember my grandfather with his slide projector and seeing the shows. But in the modern era, in the 21st century, you have something much more sophisticated. You have a phone full of family photos that show, that you might look at, you might show to your friends, and that you scroll through sometimes when you're all alone. You see these beautiful moments, like real moments even. Your kids happy at holiday celebrations. Your partner looking really happy, smiling and laughing at something. And there are pictures of the vacation that you felt briefly was like the life you wanted. You might have a Facebook profile that says, "Look how connected I am." And then in the middle of the night alone, when you can't sleep and you look at that, it might just feel like hollow in a way you can't explain to anyone. And you might have this LinkedIn profile that tells the world exactly what you've built. And again, when you're looking at it at 2 a.m., you ask yourself whether any of it means what you hoped it would. All that building, all that doing. We're all making carousels now, except the phone is what holds the carousel, and social media is the projector. We click through the beautiful images of our lives, and we might feel, even briefly, the twinge of longing that Dawn described, the warmth of it, and the ache of it. And then we put the phone down, and we might still feel alone and disconnected. The distance isn't because of any sense of cruelty, and it's not because of weakness either. Like, hear that. But it's a pattern that made sense once for you, probably a long time ago, when getting close to the people you love might have felt way too dangerous. When being fully seen had a cost you weren't sure that you could afford. And you might have made that decision a while ago and now you can't get out of it. Because you are lonely inside of it. It feels painful, even if nobody knows. Even if you'd struggle to say it out loud. So that's what I want to talk about today. So I spent a lifetime sitting with people in the hardest moments of their lives. And I want to tell you something I observed. Just not as like a diagnosis, not as a professional, not as a framework even. Just someone who was in the room being present. The men who came to see me in my office were not broken. They were often the most capable, intelligent, perceptive people I've ever met. They could read a situation, solve a problem, provide for the people they loved, and hold everything together when things got hard. And I almost felt close to having everything they ever wanted. A life that looked right from a distance and felt slightly unreal from the inside. People they loved who just felt somehow out of reach, even when they were sitting across from them at the dinner table. A competence that doesn't translate into the thing they actually wanted the most, which was just to be known and accepted and loved. To stop managing the distance, to be able to just be themselves and in the room fully. So I was thinking recently of a good friend of mine, his name's Barry, and he's really one of the smartest and most caring people I know. And he didn't need me to explain like all of this stuff in technical language about human connection. And I tried, oh, I tried, because I felt frameworks were the answer. But really, I just realized he and most people just need to feel like someone sees them. He said I have something about me that makes me what he calls, and the mystery, the special sauce behind me, Magic Susie. Which kind of makes me laugh every time. But I think what he means is she doesn't ask me to perform that Magic Susie. I can just be present with someone. And that's not magic. It's just what happens when someone stops treating you like a problem to be solved and starts treating you like a person worth knowing, a person of value. So if Don were sitting here, I wouldn't just analyze him. I'd say to him, you did something extraordinary in that room. You touched something real. And then you went home to the silence you built like around yourself. And don't think you were a bad man. I don't think that. I think you were a man who learned very early that being fully seen was too dangerous to risk without something between you and it. So you put a lens between yourself and everything you loved, and you became brilliant at the distance. So that doesn't mean that those of you who do that can't change this patterns that lead to such unhappiness. There's always like hope, and there's always possibility of change. So a lot of men watching this right now, and perhaps women, know exactly what I'm talking about. Not because you're like Dawn in every way, but because you know that feeling. The love that's genuinely there, but somehow can't find its way into the moment when it's needed. The wall that appears somewhere between you and who you are at work and who you are at home. The performance that started as protection and became a real prison of pain and isolation. So here's what I want to offer you with my channel and my presence. It's not just a fix. It's not a one-size-fits-all solution to anybody's problems. I'm not going to tell you another thing you're failing at. You might feel like you hear enough of that in your life already. It's just this. Don sold the carousel. He packaged the longing and made it beautiful, but it also kept his distance intact. That was his genius and his tragedy in the same motion. I'm not going to do that. What I'm bringing you isn't a pitch. It's just what's actually true about that ache of feeling close to your own life but not quite inside it. And the patterns that run quietly underneath the performance. About what it might look like to understand. Not just fixed. Like simply to start with understanding what's actually happening. And you all deserve someone in the room who isn't selling you anything. Again, if Don were here, I think I'd just say to him, you didn't have to feel completely alone in a room full of people. Not because the answer was just simple, but because you deserve someone in the room who could see past the performance to the person underneath it. And you don't have to feel alone either. There are people in your life, or people you might meet, who can see you. I am one of those type of people who can see past performances to the essence of who people really are. I have always been able to see the capable, complicated, and quietly lonely people behind this carousel who can't find the door out. You don't have to remain alone. We'll find our way forward together. So take care of yourself, and I'll see you next time.